Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast. We got a big shock yesterday when we found out that Tucker Carlson had been fired from Fox News. We didn't immediately know he had been fired over maybe he left, maybe he quit for some reason. But pretty quickly we got some indication of the fact that it was with immediate effect. So no final episode, no last couple weeks of episode, he's out immediately, his emails turned off, all that kind of stuff. When Chris Wallace left Fox News for CNN, I guess what was it, last year? Maybe it was, I don't know exactly when it was, in the last year or two, and announced that he was leaving. But you announce that you're moving somewhere else, and it's a couple weeks or something like that. And what we learned uh, over the next few hours is that he got the call that morning. They were advertising for some, I don't know, special, or some Tucker Carlson thing they were doing promos for Monday morning. So this happened. He gets a call. It's almost with an immediate effect that a statement is put out. He's gone. And this is something that, unlike, there are, I think when the Trump indictment finally came down, we didn't expect it that day. We'd been expecting it 6 weeks before or 8 weeks before. And then I think a couple days before it came out, they put out some like, we're going to be busy making sandwiches the next 2 months. So, it's not going to happen till midsummer. And then it dropped and everybody's sort of, oh my God. But obviously that case, no one's surprised that Trump was in some legal trouble, right? No one was surprised he was under investigation in New York. And I think most people, some people get into this thing of like, he's never going to get indicted. I'm not falling for that anymore. Don't try to throw me off base with these like constantly saying someone's going to happen. So anyway, if we found out today that Trump, that Jack Smith guy had indicted Trump, we'd be pretty surprised, not expecting it today. But it's not like it's like out of the blue. We know there's a big investigation, but this Tucker Carlson thing's totally out of the blue. I mean, no one thought. I mean, he's their biggest star. And one of the interesting things, and I mentioned this in a post yesterday. We're recording this Tuesday, a day earlier than usual, in case you're trying to place where we are in the news chronology. It's Tuesday at 12:27 as I'm speaking. Uh, we uh, he's the big star, and one thing I saw that was very interesting to me a couple days ago. Yeah, okay, a couple days ago. I'm getting my we experience a week or a month in a day these days. One of the things I saw was someone pointing out that if you looked at everything that Dominion came up with, most of the really bad stuff was from Bartiromo, Lou Dobbs, Pirro, kind of the B team, and people who are maybe on Fox Business and stuff like that. Carlson was in there, but he was not the one. He was not the worst offender in the narrow legal sense of saying really specific defamatory things. So if anybody was going to get fired, it was going to be like Maria Bartiromo, Judge Pirro. They already canned Lou Dobbs at the very beginning of this. He was like yanked without notice, like the second the suit was filed, because he was one of the worst offenders. So, big surprise. He's their biggest draw, all that kind of stuff. But as I was thinking about this intro, you know, uh, what is it? 6-7 years ago now, Bill O'Reilly, who was originally the big guy. He's actually 9 o'clock, not 8 o'clock. Or no, he was 8 o'clock. Yeah, he was 8 o'clock. Tucker Carlson replaced him. Obviously, that was to a certain extent presaged a little more, since, I don't know, he'd had like 8 sexual harassment allegations and multiple suits and everything. But the reason this is, and I was saying, why is this feels bigger? And it's also kind of funny, like, why are we treating this as a major news event? right? If like there was a change in like MSNBC's programming or CNN, we wouldn't say, "Oh my God, how does this changes everything?" Right now, some of that is because Fox News works differently in the GOP ecosystem than these other networks do. Right? It's a symbiotic. It's almost kind of like one organism, right? So it's different in that sense. But I think the big difference is that you can say Bill O'Reilly was outrageous and this and that and the other, and he was offensive. But there was no Bill O'Reilly ideology, except to the extent that sort of like middle-aged, angry white guy mad at the black people and the gays is an ideology. And that is an ideology, right? It is the Fox ideology. But there's something different with Tucker Carlson. He was pushing an ideology and pushing it in a certain way, in a way that made him kind of different than the rest of the Fox News hosts. And we'll get into that. But he played a role. He was playing a role in our national politics, I think, it wasn't just that had the highest ratings of the CNN hosts and was the biggest lightning rod and stuff like that. He was basically kind of, I saw someone saying this today, and I think this captures it. He was taking the Trump ideology and making it more ideological, making it more explicitly ideological, and to a great extent, removing Trump from the equation. Not that he was anti-Trump, although we saw in some of these private emails that he was anti-Trump. But unlike a Hannity, who half the time, Hannity is just, how do we defend Trump? Where's Trump on this? And how do I, do something that Josh can't even say on the air, even on this podcast, on Trump's behalf? Carlson was basically taking the great replacement ideology with its anti-Semitic overlayerings, the elites, the salt of the earth, working people of middle America, and he was kind of refining that into its concentrated form. Again, without Trump and Trump's grievances being the central issue. And so that makes his firing, pretty consequential on a lot of different levels. Although obviously it's not going to be like, Fox is going to like steal Chris Hayes and like put him on at 8:00 on Fox. You're going to get someone pretty much like him. And they've got a good record of, creating new people. They didn't create Tucker, but they created him as this Tucker. Tucker wasn't this guy before he got to Fox. I'm not saying he was a great guy, but he's just different, right? He found kind of his footing at Fox. And that leads us to the kind of the big mystery, which why did this happen? And we have not gotten any clear explanation for that. We still have not, and it's a day later. And in our news era, things move pretty quick. It's hard to keep things secret. And as I mentioned in a post yesterday, seeing lots of stories, well, this contributed to it. And there was some pretty bad shit that came up in Discovery in the Dominion suit. And that was, they needed to get rid of him because of that. And there's this harassment suit. And maybe there were, kind of landmines there, and they had to get rid of him because of that. And Rupert Murdoch just will not brook any anti-Semitism. And that's why he got canned. And 10 other reasons. And the thing is, and this is a bit like the lead up to the Iraq War, right? Josh has strange analogies, but work with me on this one. In the lead up to the Iraq War, there was like, WMD and 9/11, and we were gonna democratize Iraq, and, it was gonna help Israel, and, 30 different reasons, none of which had anything to do with each other, and you hear all these different reasons, and you're like, "You know what? There can't be 30 reasons. Any one of these maybe could be the reason, but they can't all be the reason, so what's going on here?" And there's something a little similar with this. There's not gonna be a contributing reason why out of the blue, you fire your most popular host on your entire network. It's not gonna be like an employment review where you're like, good ratings, everybody loves him, blah, 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 but, there's he was pretty critical of management, so I don't know." There's gonna be one humongous reason why you do this. So humongous that every other good and bad thing becomes irrelevant, and you just have to do it. And we have not heard that yet. And I even had, I was even thinking last night, like maybe this was just Rupert Murdoch is so old and so shaken up by this that he thought he had to kind of throw someone over the cliff to like propitiate the gods or something like that. You know, to some extent, maybe I'm under the influence of sort of succession here, right? That I'm thinking he's Logan Roy, but I think he is kind of Logan Roy. So maybe there's something to that too. So anyway, that is what we are going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about, there was this other firing, Don Lemon at CNN, and there at least it was a surprise that it happened yesterday. We weren't surprised, but I mean he's been on the ropes at CNN for a long time, for a lot of bad reasons and seemingly some good reasons too. But again, another pretty big shakeup in the cable news firmament. We had some technical difficulties before we were starting, and that means that I had the Grady's Cold Brew copy all queued up, and now I don't. But listen, I can just tell you, Grady's Cold Brew. Right, we're coming out of the winter. You need to get your supply ready. They've got these beanbag kits. It's the simplest thing in the world. You don't have to get all your little cold brew technology, grinders and pitchers and presses and stuff like that. You can do it. You can do it super easy. You go to Grady'sColdBrew.com and you can get 25% off if you use the promo code TPM. So that's get 25% off with promo code TPM when you go to Grady'sColdBrew.com. So check it out. It's great stuff. So, Kay Rigo, what the fuck is going on?
It's funny. I was trying to think of when is the last time I've been so kind of rocked back on my heels by news that was so, because like you say, it's even the kind of the biggest news events of the past few years, we kind of knew it was coming, like Dobbs, we knew it wasn't a when, not an if, the first thing that occurred to me was when Trump got COVID, because I remember being super shocked by that. But even then it was also like,
Of course he
there
got
were
COVID.
super spreaders all the time around
Right.
him, right? So this was kind of the first one that was a news earthquake that there was just no inkling of beforehand, which I think contributes to what you're talking about, which is that every write-up I've seen is like, well, he hated women, or he was very racist, or, he drove off advertisers. And it's like, yes, that is
4
his
years ago.
appeal. That
Yeah.
is his whole brand. Like,
Yeah.
that's by design. Yeah, so, and it's baffling because I think specifically the kind of subgenre of media journalism is like the most kind of gossipy, rumor heavy, blurry lines between kind of colleagues and friends and social contemporaries or whatnot. So it is just like pretty bizarre that we've reached this point in this news cycle and nobody has any idea. All the media reporters at the major outlets are doing just a little like, some person said this contributed. And it's like, of course, Tucker Carlson is to the majority of the country a toxic brand. But again, by design, has been that way for years. He is the face of the network because of that, not in spite of it. So I think where we should start, I guess, is the various kind of theories that you and I have talked about, that we've talked about with our other TPM colleagues, just kind of the various, darts at the dartboard that might kind of contribute and what we kind of think about them. So I guess let's start with the Abby Grossberg lawsuit because that one's coming up more and more ever since Tucker's executive producer Justin Wells was fired the same time that he was, which we'll get into, but not super unusual, right? Like anchors and EPs are usually pretty close at the hip, so I'm not sure how compelling of evidence that is, but the thinking goes Wells was along with Carlson was named as defendants on the Grossberg lawsuit, where she basically says Fox News attorneys bullied her into giving false testimony during the Dominion suit, plus told her to kind of downplay the fact that her workplace was misogynistic and replete with sexual harassment and unfair pay disparities and kind of the whole enchilada. And so yesterday I went back and read the 100-page lawsuit while the Tucker stuff was happening to kind of refresh myself on to what degree he was a primary antagonist in her lawsuit, because even from the beginning, I kind of felt like I'm sure her lawsuit isn't good for the network, but again, A, misogyny at Fox News is like not exactly breaking news, and B, Abby Grossberg is one person, right? The Dominion lawsuit was a company, and we were talking about damages in the billions. Like her lawsuit is just not going to rival that in terms of size or threat to the company. So I was skeptical. But anyway, so I went through and like kind of looked for all the parts where he's mentioned her experience when she moves over to his show, leaving from Maria Bartiromo's, and he barely factors in. Like he is kind of part of it in the sense of, the buck stops here. He allowed this workplace to be a truly vile and horrific place for women to
And
work
utterly
based on their
unsurprising.
account. Yeah,
Utterly
right.
unsurprising.
But it's not really that he was mean to her or rude to her. Like their direct interactions in the brief is basically like one exchange that's put in there to kind of prove she was doing her job in a way that he wanted her to. And then, she got kind of backstabbed by some of these various like creepy underlings that walk around and print out pictures of Nancy Pelosi in bikinis and stuff. But he's really only there because he's kind of, he's the head of the org, right? It's his job to kind of tamp this down, and he obviously doesn't care, but it's not him as primary antagonist making her life miserable at Fox News.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, this isn't how it should be, but the way it is, for him to have his job endangered, I think that lawsuit would have to be he kept propositioning me. He would, show me pictures of naked women and like, ask if I thought they were hot. It would have to be him. Him doing the stuff. Maybe not only him, but him doing a lot of bad stuff. And just the way that network rolls, I don't think he turned a blind eye to what other people were doing would cut it for firing him. I just that's just not how it works there. And the other thing is, I saw some people saying, well, you don't know what's going to come out of that. And sure, absolutely. But if you're the lawyer and doing the sort of the initial legal briefs and the comms for that, you are going to hit with something really big in the initial news story. Because of course you do. You're not going to say, well, there's the time Tucker did that, but we'll get to that at trial. Not how it works. Could be, sure. But again, that's just not how it works. All lawsuits of these kinds, and when I say these kinds, ones that are going to have are going to be a big public presence, whether they're Dominion or a sexual harassment case at Fox, you are going to start the conversation with some really stunning accusations, and if possible, backing them up with some emails or stuff like that. And as Kate says, it's just not there in the initial lawsuit. And that just it would be very different from anything in our experience, that with him as a buck stops here offender, that just doesn't, you don't get fired for that. Certainly the biggest person at the entire network does not get fired for that.
Right. And I think to kind of poke another hole in that theory of we don't know what would come out, which of course not, but I think people are maybe thinking a little bit about the Dominion case in that and thinking, well, like, oh, we didn't get the text until discovery, right? And that was the big damning part for Fox News, which is true. But this lawsuit is coming from someone who worked inside the company who's trying to show that these people have broken laws in their conduct. And it's not that it's kind of this overarching uh broad sweep of her experience. I mean, it's super super detailed episodes, complete with the text messages, the quotes that people said. And I mean, all of Carlson's kind of, including his EP, his underlings, I mean, they look terrible, awful, just bad people. And he is just kind of he looms because it's his show, but he's not really involved in the day-to-day interactions that she's talking about. So, yeah, I think this is one of the theories that to me is like, I mean, I see why some people are reaching for it. It's recent, right? The lawsuit was only in March. Um, and if you subscribe to the heaping up effect, I can see this being a compelling thing, but I kind of agree with you that it's got to be bigger. Him
Yeah,
letting his underlings be dicks is not going to bring down the face of the network.
yeah, and it's also like no one is surprised.
Right.
No one could be remotely surprised that this is the kind of scene that exists over there, and it does seem like his show was particularly bad. Um, and again, that's not a surprise because it is very, kind of militant frat boy energy there, right? She had bad experiences working on Bartiromo's show. So clearly, even when you've got the top person is a woman, you're still at Fox, right? Um, so yeah, it just doesn't doesn't seem like enough. And again, it's not like, I think when you really talk brass tacks, if you are inside Fox, you're not going to say like, yeah, he was just the buck stops with him, but still, look what it's said about our internal culture. Well, like nothing, because everybody assumes that you guys are like that. So if that just it just builds up the brand, and I'm half being facetious, but not really, right? I mean, everyone assumes it is like this, and I think O'Reilly is a good example here, because O'Reilly, I mean, I lose track of which ones were settled and which we can say are still alleged, but he was very, um, uh, pl- you know, plausibly multiple allegations of him, harassing all sorts of different women and doing a lot of things himself. It just doesn't add up, and yeah, based on what we know, it does not add up as a plausible explanation.
Okay, so let's move on to one of the other leading theories, which we can term the Rupert Murdoch is losing it theory, right? Which basically says that he's 92, right? He's getting up there. And that he is growing kind of more impulsive and tempestuous with age, and that people are mumbling doubts about his fitness to kind of steer this news behemoth, and that he was displeased particularly with some of the texts that came out from Dominion that showed Carlson kind of shit talking the management and uh, being disloyal to the upper echelons of Fox News. And so being the kind of decrepit and tempestuous man he is, Murdoch just said, out with him. And that's that. And that's why we've really no detail about what it was about his conduct, because it just boils down to the titan of the company deciding he'd had enough.
Yeah, I mean, It's funny. I did a post last night where I basically said something like this as an alternative explanation, but I also said, like, interpret this as like somewhere between like an edge case possibility and an alternative universe possibility because it's kind of absurd on its face. And yet, um, I would still say that. I think edge case, alternative universe, but we seem to have reporting that says that Suzanne Scott called Tucker yesterday morning and did not tell him why he was being fired. That's a little odd, and who knows who the source is for that, since presumably only two people on the call. But let's assume for the moment that's true. Okay, um, and then you have this weird thing about all of these. This contributed, that contributed. Um, when I thought about it, it did kind of make me wonder. Well, maybe that's because no one actually knows what the fuck is going on here. And everybody, even inside Fox News, is saying, well, he did kind of criticize everybody a lot and this and that and maybe this and maybe that. And it does occur to me that, he is 92 years old. There was this guy, Max Taney, did a piece at Semaphore. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name. I don't think I've ever heard it. I've read it a million times. I've never heard it pronounced. Basically did an article saying like Murdoch's done a lot of weird things over last year. He was going to like reattach the two companies together. He was going to do this. He announced a new marriage, then he unannounced it, a month later.
Mhm.
Things that are kind of like a bit all over the place. And it did make me wonder how he's just, as much as some people wanted to pretend that Fox kind of dodged a bullet or got away with something, he's just had one of the biggest professional humiliations of his entire life. It cost him $1 billion. It did make me wonder, maybe he just sometimes powerful men, especially powerful older men, will just do something intentionally inexplicable and weird just to show people they're still the big dog and you never know what they're going to do. And they'll, kind of a jealous God just wipe someone out from out of nowhere. At the end of the day, I don't find that a a very plausible explanation. Um, but some version of that might be true. It is really weird that we're a day into this and we don't have any idea why this happened, and none of the explanations add up. Let me actually just mention quickly one thing that has come up in a lot of emails. Um, a number of people have asked, is it possible that this was like a secret provision of the deal with Dominion, that they had to fire Tucker Carlson? I've seen a number of lawyers say, no, not how it works. And I don't know from a legal perspective if that can be how it works or doesn't work, but I'm pretty sure from a logical perspective, it is absolutely not how it works. And this is why. Dominion felt they had repaired their reputation as much as they were able to do and needed to do. They also got over $1 billion. They don't care whether Tucker Carlson still works at Fox News. They couldn't care less. They got what they think they needed, and they truly do not care whether Tucker Carlson works there. It would be conceivable if it were a public part of the thing that would show how strong they were, that Fox had to pay a big price, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as a secret thing, it makes no sense at all because they don't care. So I think we can just, for listeners, if you're thinking about that, scratch that off the list. That is not what happened.
There's also, yeah, I mean, the biggest thing with Dominion is just it makes no sense for it to be Tucker. Like, of the ones named in the suit, he had at times pushed back against some of the conspiracy theories that actually became, I think, a big part of the case where the judge said clearly some people at Fox knew what was up and pointed to Tucker's
Yeah.
comments. So, yeah, I mean, the Dominion thing is only compelling because of the timing. I think otherwise, the connection to Tucker himself is so tenuous with that lawsuit.
He simply
Um,
wasn't one of the biggest offenders on that front. He fit
exactly.
into it in this different way, as you say, because he was like, dude, this is crazy.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the other kind of big well, relatively bigger theory that's been circulating is the Ray Epps theory, which is kind of this genre of stories that Fox News hosts are kind of dead set about talking about, even though it's obviously legally dangerous. Even though it's one of these things where Fox News plucks figures out of obscurity and makes them into these like giant MAGA universe main characters, even if they're just kind of normal people. And in this case,
And for our listeners, before we go on, give people just a 30-second version of who Ray Epps is, because I'm not sure
yeah,
everybody's going to know even who this guy is.
yeah. So he was like this pro Trump guy, right? And he was at January 6th. He like, just kind of your typical Trumpy, whatever part of this swept up, blah, blah, blah. And then and I don't know if this originated with Tucker, or if this was kind of an online thing that bubbled up to
I
him,
think
the
I think
the
the latter.
reimagining.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think I think it became a kind of an online conspiracy theory first.
Right. Which is such a healthy pipeline with Fox News, but basically turns him into this like he's a deep state agent, right? He's a plant. He is an operative who's like masquerading as a MAGA guy. And this is like of the vein of the Seth Rich stuff. If our listeners remember that, which was, what was he, a Democratic operative
He was
who
just someone who had a middling job at the DNC. Just
right, and
some
he
guy.
was
Yeah.
killed in, like, a burglary gone awry, and they spun that into this whole big conspiracy theory that put his, like, grieving parents through the ringer for years. It's of that genre where this character has been created and made huge and fantastic and powerful, and in this case, Epps has said, that he had to go into hiding. The FBI has like put out an official statement that Epps is not working for them and never has. And I guess there was a big 60 minutes segment on this, what, Sunday? So
Yeah, so the
right
day
before
before he
Tucker
yeah.
got the ouster, which is what has given this theory legs, I think, that, because everyone's trying to figure out why this timing, right? So maybe it's the 60 minutes things and the Epps thing, and Epps has made gestures in the direction of pursuing legal action, about the kind of alleged defamation here. But I'm interested to hear what you think, because in this one, at the very least, Carlson is the main character, right? Like he's the main one who has been uh, kind of re-upping this conspiracy theory day after day, and this is his thing. So I think in that way, it is a little bit distinctive from the Grossberg thing and the Dominion thing, where he was just such a more of like a secondary character. Here, at least, he is the primary antagonist. But again, I think to me, it's just like Fox News and litigation
That's how
friendly
they roll. Yeah.
entities.
Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of the downside of wanting to do some light conspiracy theorizing. It's not new to them. I don't think Ray Epps is the kind of person who is of such stature or wealth or power that he represents a kill shot to the network. So again, it's just I'm skeptical.
Yeah, so the Epps thing is one of the more plausible explanations that I've seen of this, but it's still not very plausible in my mind. This is one of those cases, as you said, they pluck someone out of total obscurity and make him the evil bad guy, and Tucker has carried the ball. It is pretty egregious, but you know, like everything else they do, it's pretty egregious. And they just had the 60 Minutes special. His lawyer has made some threatening noises, and I do think, and this applies to a lot of potential Fox News litigants, that people who think they've got a solid case against Fox look at this settlement and say, "Wow, they paid these guys $1 billion. They're ready to cut checks. Like, why am I not getting in on that action?" There's a couple problems with that. The Epps thing's been sitting out there forever. I mean, it's literally for like a year and a half. They've been, maybe longer, they've been going on about it. Um, a key thing with Dominion is that they are a commercial operation. And, damages are about damages that you can at least somewhat plausibly back up. Ray Epps is just some older guy living somewhere in America. He may be retired. I don't know if he's like a truck driver or who knows what. There are just limits on what his plausible damages can be. Certainly, his compensatory damages can be. And I would think that Fox would look at this and say, all right, if he files a lawsuit, we're going to cut him a check for like $5 million and just be done with it. And 5 million is a huge amount of money to us mortals, but like they just cut a check for, or they're about to cut a check for $800 million. So it just, it just doesn't add up. And that's kind of where we are. It simply does not explain the totality of this one. And one thing I originally thought was, because I guess what Epps has said he wants in these sort of like demand statements is he wants Tucker Carlson to go on TV and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Everything I was saying was bullshit. You had nothing to do with any of this." And maybe Tucker Carlson said, "Fuck that. I'm not doing that. I'm Tucker Carlson. I'm not going to humiliate myself that way." And things spun out of control and he was fired. But everything we have seen is that that's not what happened. That there was no ricocheting progress of events that way. So big picture, it's just not a plausible explanation of what happened here, which is in media terms the equivalent of like a summary execution of your biggest guy. Doesn't add up.
And now, we're over 24 hours from this news breaking, and we still haven't heard anything from Tucker himself. He hasn't put out any kind of public statement and has, declined to comment, and everything I've seen. So, it's interesting. Mystery abounds. We'll, keep following this as kind of one of the biggest media stories of recent history. And now let's talk about another big, though I think not quite as big, story that broke yesterday. The CNN comms team, perhaps sensing a good opportunity to unload their baggage as well, which is that Don Lemon, who recently got a new gig doing this kind of like soft focus, blah di da morning show alongside Caitlin Collins and Poppy Harlow, that comes as CNN is trying and struggling a bit to kind of find its footing. It like basically every media outlet kind of uh, had a shtick during the Trump era, right, where it encouraged its on-air talent to be combative and aggressive, tear it up with Sarah Huckabee Sanders during briefings. And that kind of went by the wayside. And now they're doing this thing where they're trying to be less quote unquote partisan, whatever that means, which just seemed to kind of like boot anyone who's too liberal from the ranks and try to make it more, I guess, appealing to those on the right, or kind of, the Lincoln Party types, the
Right.
never
Right.
Trumper conservative, whatever. And part of that was to take Don Lemon, who had been remolding himself in that kind of combative Trump era form, to take him from the night show to this soft focus morning show. But this one, unlike the Tucker Carlson one, had some foreshadowing. His big dust up was obviously when he said on air he called Nikki Haley a woman past her prime, and then goes on to specify, in case anyone's wondering, that a woman's prime is her 20s and her 30s, maybe her 40s. But I think after that, might as well take her around back and just kill her now. But so that was a big dust up. He like had to apologize. Nikki Haley immediately started selling merch. And the Nikki Haley thing seemed to just kind of be the breach of behavior that was widely known to be happening. And a Variety article really did the yeoman's work of detailing all of that, which is that he has had issues with female co-anchors for a long time, that he was kind of purposely removed from working with women, and that this morning show was the first time that he's been being put back in that position. Some just kind of like weird, almost cartoonish behavior of a falling out with his former co-anchor and texting her, threats about how he's going to take down her career. As this kind of thing does, it has also opened the floodgates to anyone who's kind of got an anecdote about Don Lemon. And I don't know if you saw this one, but the funniest one was that he was out to dinner with someone, and he told her, I guess she was considering what dessert to order, and she was considering the sorbet, and he was like, "It's pronounced sorbet." And she like giggled because she thought he was joking. He was like, "No, it's sorbet, like obviously." And then the waiter comes over and he orders sorbet, and the waiter's like, "My man, that's sorbet," you know? But anyway, all this kind of stuff that he was kind of, the way you put it, Josh, before we got on air was, a problem child, that he kind of, uh, was a difficult personality, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, we'd been having foreshadowing that he came with a lot of baggage, that the show hasn't been doing well, this, kind of attempt to do a softball morning type thing. Um, so him leaving is definitely less of an earthquake, than Tucker's is. And but there was, a little bit of last minute drama there, which is that he put out one of those like classic celebrity notes app type statements type thing. It was like weirdly formatted and the font was blue. And he kind of said, after 17 years, you would think that I would at least get the heads up when I'm being ousted. And then the CNN communications Twitter replied and said, that's not true. We offered him to meet with management, and he put out that statement instead. Whatever. The lemon has been squeezed. He is out at CNN.
Yeah, there was this Variety article which I read this morning. I knew about the Nikki Haley thing. I knew nothing beyond that, and I think that he has always worked at, I guess, times of the. I mean, I don't watch a lot of cable TV anymore, and I haven't in a long time. We used to back when we were full time in our office at TPM, we would kind of play cable news during the day. But in any case, I don't have a lot of experience watching his shows. What I've seen has been mainly from like clips, right? Kind of highlight moments and stuff like that. And so I didn't know any of this misogyny stuff or problem getting along with female hosts until I read that Variety article. And I will say, because that Variety article I think is maybe from early April, so it's from a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, something like that. And I assume the stuff in there is accurate, but it read to me like the kind of story that gets written when the network decides to open the book on you, right? And so it kind of seemed to foreshadow it in that, in that sense. I mean, because, kind of before I read that, I had, Licht has either gotten rid of a lot of people at CNN or has, kind of publicly let them swing in the wind and, implicitly kind of beg for their job or show they can sort of get right with the new approach at CNN. So I had seen it largely through that prism. Um, with the Variety article, you know, it seems like a lot else. It's still a little hard for me to figure, because is he really being canned for that after all this time? I kind of saw the Haley thing as he was already clearly, they wanted to get rid of him, and he gave them a pretty good reason with that. So I kind of thought the writing was maybe on the wall for him. Uh, the whole thing is kind of a bit of a mess because, let's assume that's true, what they said. Okay, that he was offered to meet with management. I think if they call you up in the morning and say, "Hey, you're fired. You'd like to come up and talk with Chris for a few minutes. Why don't you come on up? You know, I'm not sure who wants to have that talk, right? Um, so, or even if they say kind of out of the blue, hey, come up and talk to the CEO. We got some news we want to share with you. Even if that's true, I found the whole thing a little off. I mean, you fire someone, they're going to be upset. If they kind of characterize something a little off, I don't think you put out another tweet saying, "Hey, we totally offered him to discuss his firing." It just like wiser comms hands at CNN would just say, "Okay, we're going to move past this.
Right.
Let it go." Right?
I
It
mean,
kind of
as it
everybody ended up looking pretty bad here.
yeah, and as it is, you're deciding to, like, put this guy out with the trash of, a super crowded news cycle,
Yeah.
hoping that people don't pay so much attention to your thing, like,
Yeah.
he it sounds like he has done a lot of bad things for sure, but I think it's a pretty normal human reaction to be
Yeah.
upset in that
Yeah.
moment.
I mean, it's certainly kind
I'm
of
sure
like
Tucker's upset too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's one of these things where, you know, I, I, I believe those things happened, or at least I assume they happened, because Variety is a legitimate, you know, when someone wants to kind of put all your dirty laundry out there, that doesn't mean the dirty laundry isn't true, right? I'm sure Variety is a legitimate publication. I don't think they would just kind of get on the phone with someone at CNN and tell them all these stories and they would just print it. So I assume it's true. I'm not so clear that is why he was being fired. He, he is, he's just outspoken. The thing that there was there was an interview he did, I guess, just a couple days ago with this Republican presidential candidate, where the Republican presidential candidate was saying this, Vivek. I apologize.
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly how to pronounce his name. But in any case, where the guy was saying all this stuff about, well, African Americans got their freedoms because of the Second Amendment and the NRA, just total nonsense. And Lemon was kind of like, dude, what are you talking about? And it was clearly one of those things where I think to the eyes of new CNN management, Lemon would have been coming at him with a kind of a resistance posture, right? That's not true. That's Trump hogwash. That's BS. Blah 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 blah. And his co-anchor, which I'm not sure if it wasn't Caitlin. I guess it was Poppy Harlow or whoever it was kind of sitting there, and you can see her this look on her face, sort of like, dude, Don, you were told not to do this, and you're like, okay, you're I guess this is your final interview, kind of this very uncomfortable thing. And I think that has him talking to the producers in his earphone, where he's like, if you're going to talk to me in my earphone here, I can't do the interview. So I think even they were saying, dude, stop, don't don't
Jeez.
don't go down this path. So uh it kind of rings a little more true to me that is why he was being fired, even if all this other stuff completely merited his firing. But who knows?
Oh,
It's a big mess all
yeah.
around.
And I mean, I wanna be abundantly clear here, like, the details in the Variety story go back years.
Yeah, like I think,
So
yeah, like years and years and years.
so, the evidence is that he has a problem working with women. That is grounds for firing. He should not have been able to stay in the industry as long as he has, and, like, I don't want any of this to be misconstrued that we're shedding tears for him. Um, Also, the CNN coming out with the like, "Well, we offered to give him a meeting to tell him he was fired." Like, fuck you guys too. And also, this is obviously not because you care about how he treats women. It's because he's become a big enough of a problem in other ways that you want to get rid of him. So, no heroes in this story.
Totally no heroes. Totally no heroes. And just messy.
Exactly.
all
Messy. A
around.
day of freaking cable news mess, I tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah, no
Um,
question.
and we don't have to super get into this, but we've been having some technical problems on this pod, which I'm sure you, the listener, won't even notice due to our Jackie, our producer's editing magic. But while we were kind of waiting for a second, we also saw that Nate Silver is out at ABC, which is not exactly of a piece with the cable news mess. But God, the general media mess of this week has just been ricocheting in all directions.
Yeah, the thing that was a little confusing to me about that is, at least the initial reports we've seen, is that, this is part of some layoffs at ABC. So I don't think this isn't like Nate Silver was fired. This is that there's another round of layoffs and he's leaving ABC as part of these layoffs. What was confusing to me is that at least the initial reports say that 538 will stay with ABC. And I had at least understood that first with the New York Times and then with ABC, that Silver had, basically was licensing his brand to these mega brands for periods of time, but he retained ownership of the thing. So at the end of X number of years, he can go take it to the next place. So I was unclear about exactly how that happened. Now, um, I think I was just wrong, but in this case, Nate kind of fired me as a friend a couple months ago on on Twitter because he had found we had argued a few times about COVID. So I guess he no longer, he's written me off, but we've been acquaintances for some time. And a few years ago, like we had dinner and talked about some of this stuff. So this isn't just something I vaguely heard. I thought I knew this. But I guess something changed. Either maybe maybe the arrangement with ABC was different, maybe it changed subsequent to that. I guess I'm a little unclear. I actually like 538 a lot, but digital media brands have a pretty hard time, uh um pretty hard time making money. So and I don't know if they're going to have if they are going to have are they still going to do the big election prediction models without him, since he's, supposed to be such a big part of that? So I have no idea.
The underlying conclusion of this pod is corporate journalism sucks, sucks the people involved, sucks to the people involved, sucks in every way. Which is why if you don't support TPM, you should,
Yeah,
because
you
we
totally
don't do
should.
this kind of shit.
Yeah. Yes, I that is absolutely true. And I will say, you have in these one of the many reasons why what Kate just said is true is that in these big mega corporations, you have things happening that don't necessarily have a lot to do with the news, right? You have some new strategy coming down from the parent corporation. You have it's just weird. So yeah,
Yeah.
become a member of TPM. That's the moral of the story.
So we're going to wrap up with some non-media related news, which is last Friday night, we finally got word from the Supreme Court on the big mifepristone case that has been kind of dominating the headlines, which, last we heard the Fifth Circuit was going to reimpose all these restrictions on the drug, potentially take the generic form of the drug off the market altogether. The DOJ and Danco, one of the manufacturers of mifepristone, appealed to the Supreme Court, basically saying, hey, put these lower court rulings on ice, at least until this case makes its way back up to you. The thing is, in a normal judiciary, this should have been a no-brainer. I mean, you've got lower court rulings that have caused uproar, by legal observers and scholars and all these people saying these opinions are insane, that this relies on no precedent, that this would kind of completely demolish the way the FDA operates, far removed from mifepristone. but it's abortion and it's the Supreme Court, so you can never feel that comfortable in that. Ultimately, we finally got the ruling on Friday. The justices who voted to grant the stay didn't write anything, so we're not exactly sure how the vote breakdown goes because you don't have to mark down that you're which way you voted. We know for sure that Alito dissented from granting the stay, and we know that Thomas wouldn't have granted the stay. The difference there is just that Alito wrote out his dissent and Thomas didn't join his dissent, so he's just kind of separately wouldn't have granted the stay. But we don't know exactly how the other 7 voted. We can kind of assume that they probably would have registered their dissent if they did, but we know reasonably we can be sure that the 3 liberals voted to grant the stay, and then that would have been 2 more conservative votes needed for the way it shook out. And then the other 4 pages are basically Alito doing this kind of protracted temper tantrum where he calls out his fellow colleagues, including notably Amy Coney Barrett, for being hypocritical about criticizing the use of the shadow docket, which is where they handed this decision down. And of course, he's being completely disingenuous in that because nobody's saying that the court shouldn't have a mechanism to decide things very quickly when there's a time crunch. Of course you need that, right? I mean, appeals of being put to death by states come up to the Supreme Court all the time. What people are mad about is they keep using that to change precedent or settle huge questions without even telling people their reasoning or bringing the arguments to full trial at all. So basically he spends time whining about that and saying they're being hypocrites and they shouldn't have granted this stay either. Then he transitions into this doesn't matter anyway because the Biden administration are scofflaws and they wouldn't even listen to anything this court said if it was an unfavorable opinion, which is kind of taking those calls we've seen from the left for the FDA to use its enforcement discretion and leave the drugs on the market and escalating that into you are enemies of the rule of law. So but, the notable thing is, like, okay, Alito whining about a decision that, like, vaguely, temporarily maintains abortion rights is not a shock. But what is notable is he does not even try to defend the merits of the lower court rulings here. All of his whining is procedural stuff. None of it is, these are legitimate opinions that deserve our respect. Of course not, because they're ridiculous. The rulings are ridiculous. Everyone knows they're ridiculous. Even Alito can't bring himself to be like, and these decisions were really good and well reasoned. But the practical effect of this is it's going to take months for the case to go through the merits process at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and then probably come back to the Supreme Court. And for the duration of that time, mifepristone will remain available as usual with its current restrictions everywhere in the country, which was not a guarantee before Friday.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on these specifics about shadow dockets and sort of appellate procedure in the federal courts, but at least from my limited understanding, this is exactly when you should use this kind of procedure because there's nothing really much to discuss here. All they are saying is that you can't do this injunction to have it, to basically make your decision have temporary effect while everybody else is figuring out whether you have any right to do it at all. So that is kind of, as you say, the death penalty final appeals kind of stuff is a comparable thing. There's really nothing to discuss. There's no question of what they're doing is simply saying, look, you're not going to we're not going to let this injunction kind of stay in place. And again, there's no precedent, there's no legal issue to discuss there at all. So it is just whining, and it's certainly good that that this was at least for 6 months. I don't know how long people expect this to take exactly, but at least for now, this will continue to be available. My sense is probably that the justices on the Supreme Court kind of know they're a bit out on a limb here. for political in a political sense. They don't mind being out on a limb in a legal sense, but my guess is this will eventually go the way of the supporters of the availability of this drug, but I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah, I wrote a post kind of dissecting the tea leaves of this order, and the thing that you're kind of left with is we're not sure, right? This was 4 pages of Alito whining essentially, but it's at least an indication that the conservative justices are not like super amped to take this up or to make this the one that kind of kills the availability of the abortion drug. And part of how you make that calculation is that the people who either give cues to the court or who the court at the very least don't like pissing off are not being that rabid about this. You have Lindsey Graham saying, I'll live with whichever way it comes down. The Wall Street Journal editorial board saying that judges can't substitute their own reasoning in for the kind of expertise of agencies. Um, it's just it was decisions handed down by anti-abortion hacks, and everyone knows it. And I still think if the decision only created massive destruction within the world of abortion, it would probably be well on its way to becoming the law of the land. But it would just throw the entire kind of pharmaceutical industry into complete turmoil. And I would tentatively guess that the Supreme Court, which is going to have no shortages of lawsuits trying to get up there to give them more chances to hack back abortion access, they can afford to kind of sit back and wait for something that isn't just so buffoonish to achieve those ends.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that there's another aspect of who they're hearing from. I mean, I think those things are meaningful to them, but I have a pretty low opinion of a lot of these justices, and because of that, I think that elected Republicans, are signaling to them, this is not, don't do this, don't do this, because I think they know that abortion is already going to be a big, if not the biggest issue in the 2024 election. And you do this and you just turbocharge it like crazy because suddenly it's moving into the blue states, all the kind of stuff. And they're very political. And I don't think they want to. I think all of these things push in the same direction. So I think it's just a little more than they want to bite off. Not to mention the fact that it really would upend the whole pharmaceutical system. And they would have to kind of clean that up. And I don't think they want to do that. That doesn't sound fun to them.
Honestly, this case kind of reminds me of Moore v. Harper, the big independent state legislature theory that has since been thrown into turmoil because of the North Carolina Supreme Court. But after oral arguments, I was left with this sense of, you could tell some of the right-wing justices wanted to get it there, wanted to get satisfactory answers from the lawyers pushing the theory, but just kind of a pervasive sense of dissatisfaction, like, this is not going to do it, this is not quite enough. And that's kind of, I think, the sense you get here, which is, not that the court is suddenly going to moderate on abortion in any kind of way, but there is at least some very, very low bar that they feel like the lawsuit has to meet to not just be completely ridiculous. And this one also seems to be falling a bit short of that.
Right, right. So, yeah, I mean, so possibly good news through all of those, good
At
news
least
for bad
temporary good
reasons.
news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Okay. Well, remember that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. You can get 25% off any order by using the promo code TPM, and that is at Grady'sColdBrew.com.
All right.
All
See you
right.
next
That's it
week.
for this week. Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.